I'm Jono Buchanan, and in this video we're going to be looking at how to work with tempo changes within a Logic project. Now, switching tempo is really common if you're working to picture. Picture isn't cut to a particular tempo, and so it's the composer's job to make sure that the notes that they're writing match the picture and hit certain moments. And of course, sometimes that means that we have to speed tempos up, sometimes they come down. And of course, in other genres, sometimes it can be really advantageous to just be stepping up or down tempo as well. So we're going to see how that works within Logic in this video. Let's just hear the track we're going to be working with. Okay, now what I want to do with this cue, or this particular piece of music, is to have it repeat. I'm going to have a little bar gap where we've just got to, and then the track is going to start again at bar 11. And I'm going to copy any automation data that exists within the project when I make that copy. But what I want to do is to have the project just get a little bit faster. I want to be increasing the tension that exists within this project at bar 11 when it starts. And maybe I want to do that because I'm going to introduce a new musical element. So what we'll do is we'll record that new part. It's going to be a second violin part, which I'm going to just put in to go on top of the cellos and the basses that are already within this project, just to give us a new track element to help push the whole project on. So we'll record that first, and then we'll see how we can manage tempo changes. So let's just drop that in from here. Okay, so we've got this little new driving pattern, and what I'm actually going to do is just quantize that, just make sure it's absolutely in time, and I'm going to select all of these notes. I'm actually going to perform one of my favorite little tricks here. I'm going to knock out this note, which is already a 16th note. I'm going to just throw that away, and then what I'm going to do is to select all of the notes that I've played and copy them into the next available space in the grid. So this little quaver or eighth pattern that I recorded becomes a 16th note pattern. And with these individual copies, which at the moment are all selected, I'm just going to just turn down velocity a little bit so each note becomes an echo of the previous one, which means that we get a sound like this. Okay, so there's our new part. We'll come out of this edit window and we'll see how that sounds in the context of the piece. So we get to here, bar gap, and then the new part start. Okay, and I've just repeated that part as well. So, as I say, what I want to do really is to have a step up in tempo into bar 11. So how can I do that? How can I create an increase or a step up in tempo? Well, what I've got here, just above the main tracks, is an option to have a look at the global track options that exist within Logic. And if I toggle that on, I can see a series of individual tracks which relate to different sort of administrative tasks that exist above the MIDI or audio tracks that exist within a project. So in other words, these are kind of global controls which allow me to manage my project that's currently open. And one of those is for tempo. So this is governing the tempo of my project. And of course I can see it up here in the transport bar, and I can see that this fixed line of 90 beats per minute runs all the way through my project as it stands right now. What I want to do is to select the pencil tool, and within this tempo track at bar 11, where the playhead is right now, what I'm going to do is to click, and I'm going to create a new piece of tempo information. Now the playhead's kind of in the way, so let's move it out of the way, and you can now see that I've got another new node, which at the moment is at the same tempo as the previous one. So let's suppose I want to just come up, I don't know, maybe 3 or 4 BPM to 94 beats per minute. What this means is we're going to get this sort of subtle step up in tension because suddenly the whole cue is going to get a bit faster. Okay, so that's one way that we can manage tempo. Now, This is useful. Global tracks are an extremely useful way of you being able to see visually all of the tempo changes that exist within a project at any given moment in time. But what's also true is that we can see tempo in another way as well. Up here in the top left-hand corner, within our main browsers, we have our sort of list editors here, and one of those is for tempo. And you can see that rather than seeing them visually as a series of lines here I've got two separate entries showing me the bar positions and the timecode positions where the tempo changes within my project exist. And I can edit them in either place. If I decide that 94 is actually too much of a step and I want to maybe just go up to 93, I can change that here, and of course the display updates here as well. Now what might be quite interesting would be to say, okay, well what else could I do potentially with tempo that might be quite good? Well, let's suppose what I want to do next is to say, okay, well a half time section might be quite interesting. What I'm going to do is to select all of the drums. I'm going to grab all of this section here, and I'm going to say, okay, well at bar 19, what I want to do is to drop to half tempo. That might be quite an interesting thing to do. And I'm going to also have the strings continue through this section as well. And what I'm also going to do is to maybe just make this 4 bars rather than 8. So I'll trim off the drums at the end here. So this time what I want to do is to create a new tempo event at bar 19, which is going to be sort of half speed. Okay, so what I'm going to do is to, rather than draw the tempo change onto the global tracks area, instead what I have a chance to do is to move my playhead to the position where I want the tempo to change, bar 19, and I'm going to press plus. And Logic knows that because my playhead's at bar 19, it's at bar 19 that I want to create a tempo change. And what I'll do is to take it down to, well, I think half of that would be 46.5 BPM. So I'll enter that as a value right there. And what we should now find is that because all of this is MIDI, we're going to just drop down to half speed at that point. Let's just run it from bar 15. Okay, that's nice. So what I'm going to do is to do one last thing with tempo, which is also really useful. I'm going to copy that same section again. I'm going to have another bar gap as I did before, which is going to allow me to sort of get back up to the tempo that I want. So I'm going to put in a tempo change again, let's say a bar 23, to come back up to 93 beats per minute. So I'm back to where I was. In fact, we could even push it on a little bit more, come up to 95. And what I want to do in this last section is to actually have a tempo ramp. Rather than simply stepping from one tempo to another, what I want to do is to have what we call in Italian an accelerando. So in other words, the whole tempo is going to accelerate up to a particular point, so we build the intensity even more. I'm actually just going to take the synths out of this. Again, we're just going to keep it for the drums and the strings for now. And again, I'm going to just do this over 4 bars rather than 8. So I'm just going to trim things down a little bit here and maybe throw away the first half and move the second half back to this point. And what we'll do is we'll start it from here. So how do I make this tempo ramp that I talked about? Well, what I'm going to do is I'm going to draw a box around the area where I want to start thinking about the tempo picking up. And in fact, actually, rather than 4 bars, we'll just do it over the final 2 here. And what I'm then going to do is to come to Edit, and I'm going to come to Tempo, which is here. And down at the bottom, I've got this option called Tempo Operations. And in here, I get a little dialog box which allows me to think about the way that I want to work with tempo. So because I've selected the cycle range, automatically Logic knows that I want to work between bars 26 and 28. And what I can then do is to say, right, my starting tempo is 95 beats per minute, and I want to end at maybe 115 beats per minute. So we're going to have this upward movement. Now, between those 2 points, how often do I want to put in a new tempo node? At the moment, the density here is selecting that for me. And you can see that because I'm only going to have one tempo event, because the density is 1 bar effectively, we're just going to get a step. Whereas what I want is a series of individual notes. So what I'm going to do is instead select a 16th note, so that what we get is a whole series of tempo events that ramp up to this particular point. And what you can see at the moment is that at the moment that tempo ramp is completely linear. In other words, each step is going to be the same amount higher than the previous one. What I want to do is to have a slightly curved effect so that the tempo just ramps up more towards the end. And I can do that by selecting a curve value. So if I select something like 0.5 here, we'll see that at the moment the tempo is going to grow very quickly and then much less towards the end. Where if I select minus 0.5, what we get is the sort of shape that I wanted. So what I've done is to select the density here, which selects how many individual points I'm going to get, and then I've got a curve. I've selected where I want this to start and stop, and so now I can press the apply button. And what you'll see is we'll get a whole lot more tempo changes added to this project, and you can see the shape that was created for us as well. Now, the one button I didn't check was continue with new tempo. So what that would do is to leave the very final node at the tempo that we're ramping up to. Because I didn't check that point, what we're going to get is a new piece of tempo information at the beginning of bar 28, which takes me back to that option. So that's up to you. It could be that you want to come back to 95 beats per minute. It could be that you want to stay at the new tempo. If you forgot to check that box and you'd like to stay at the new tempo, of course, you can just select the last tempo event and delete it. And now you're staying on at the speed that your track got to. So let's hear this track coming out of this halftime section and going into this tempo ramp. So one way of creating tempo changes over a series of steps is to use tempo operations selected from the edit menu as we've seen. But what if you just want to be able to draw those directly onto the tempo track within global tracks? Well, we can do that too. So what I've done here is just slightly extend the view of tempo so we can see it more clearly. This sort of double line here allows me to drag up and down to make the global tracks bigger or smaller. So if we make this a little larger, we'll be able to see this a little bit more clearly. And what we can see is all of those tempo changes created through tempo operations as we did a moment ago. What we're going to do is we're going to remember that at bar 23, which is all the way up here, we're at 95 beats per minute, and I'm going to select all of these subsequent ones. I've clicked on the first one, held down shift and clicked on the last one to select all of those. I'm going to throw those away, and now we've just got our step back to 95 beats per minute at bar 23, at bar 23. So what I'm going to do is now think about a way of being able to draw a similar type of curve, but directly within this window. So firstly, what I'm going to do is to create a new tempo node at this point and another one at the end. Now you'd think it might be as simple as me just grabbing this second node and simply putting it up to the tempo where I want it to go, but actually that doesn't happen. What happens instead is that I get a new tempo point at the new tempo, but as a step rather than as a curve. But what it's also done is to create this intermediate point here, this little marker, which I can now start to move. So the curve that I was interested in was this kind of a shape where we get a slow acceleration in terms of steps, and then we get this nice sort of ramp of tempo changes towards the end. So again, I can move this point around to create the shape that I want, and of course I can adjust the last node in order to make sure that I end up at the tempo that I was. Now you can see that because both of these points were selected, by grabbing this last one and moving it up, I've adjusted this first point as well. So I need to be a little bit careful there. I'm going to click away, come back down to this first point and put it back at 95 so that there's no real tempo change until this point. Let's just hear that. So there's our halftime section. And there's our really nice tempo change, which is just building up that intensity towards the end. So a whole range of ways of working with tempo, either by drawing individual nodes on the tempo track within global tracks, opening up the tempo list within the browsers up in the top right-hand corner, and also being able to work with either just drawing individual tempo ramps or using tempo operations from the edit menu to help you negotiate your way around tempo changes.